Welcome to this year's e-delivery conference. As you saw on the slide there, my name is Peter Ward. I'm the Chief Executive of the UK Warehousing Association, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a moment. And it's my privilege to be moderator and facilitator of today's conference. Just from me, some opening comments really, just as the sort of what we would call the sort of bum settler, just get settled in to provoke some thoughts really for the conference today. And I'm sure the speakers and the panelists that are going to share their thoughts and insight with you would like this to be as interactive as possible. So if anybody's got a question as we go through this, please stick a hand up. We'll get a microphone out to you, and we'll try and get this this dialogue and make it interactive rather than a kind of death by PowerPoint morning. So the format for today is after my sort of initial opening comments, we have a keynote address from Karen Gibson, who is the Senior Manager of Client Relationships with the Asda to You business. And then we're going to have a panel discussion to pick up on some of those themes and some of the other themes running through the industry right now. And then at 11:15, you'll be breaking out into your roundtable sessions, which are actually in the room downstairs on the ground floor. So miss out the mezzanine floor, right to the ground floor for those roundtable sessions. Hopefully you saw the health and safety sort of notice that came up at the beginning there. No planned fire alarms today, so just the obvious things to take note of if we do need to evacuate the room here. So let's crack on with this morning's conference. As I said, I represent the UK Warehousing Association. The name is a little bit tired, but the brand is one that's been around since 1944, so we sort of stick with it. But we actually, as a business-to-business trade association, representing about 800 businesses operating in the logistics sector, I wouldn't necessarily describe what they do today as warehousing in this kind of fast-moving, high-velocity, high-speed business of logistics and fulfillment. But so the name, the brand may be a little bit misleading, but that's what we do. And actually our role seems to be gathering more and more momentum, and I'm not sure whether that's driven by the rapid, unprecedented pace of change that is going through the industry right now. Maybe a combination of that with the other big issue, the big elephant in the room, of course, Brexit. And although we've been largely a representative body for the 3PL sector for 74 years, 75th anniversary coming up next year, we've recently opened our doors up to a number of the retailers who are also interested in what we're doing, sort of fighting their corner, particularly on some of the land use and planning aspects, because one of the big challenges now, of course, is getting warehousing and fulfillment facilities fit for purpose in the right location close to the consumer, and I'm sure we're going to pick up on some of those threads as we go through the day. So that's kind of my day job, if you like. What I'd like to do really is just set the scene for some discussions today and just open our minds up to this kind of global supply chain business that we're in. And I know that the main focus of the e-delivery conference is about reaching the consumer and focusing on everything that happens in the final mile. But of course, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware, most of what we're delivering, a lot of what we're delivering to the consumer, both in general merchandise and food, non-food, is actually part of a much longer and more complex supply chain. Often goods being sourced from around the world. And so very relevant, all of this discussion at the moment about sort of global trade deals and so on and so forth. So the way I sort of see the world at the moment is sort of on this slide here. We've got this new breed of kind of technology-enabled consumers sitting at the middle of this, but around the outside of that, we've got a very fragile and uncertain set of circumstances. And just to share some of that with you, of course, as I mentioned, this this slide was actually in our slide pack before the 23rd of June last year, and it still probably is relevant. We are sort of scratching our heads and all wondering what the outcome is going to be, and hopefully you guys now are planning for 2 or 3 different kind of potential scenarios, and maybe we might sort of get into that during the day today. Obviously we've got the falling pound. This is pushing the cost of sourcing in those Asian markets up now. All of those hedged currencies that were in place at the time of the referendum when the pound actually took the dip have sort of expired, and now we're sort of seeing this 15-17% devaluation of the pound really taking effect, not just on the sourcing but also on the labour in our industry as well. One of the things that we're working on is this exodus of the European labour, which is hurting, and again maybe we can pick up on some of that and understand how that's affecting particularly retailers going into peak now that have relied historically on a pool of temporary labour, often coming from our friends in Europe. Volatile stock markets, somebody sneezes in London and suddenly there's an impact across the pond in New York or Tokyo or wherever. And it seems also there's a new style of politics out there now as well. You can sort of stand to be elected on an idea and then put your whole political party and the whole machinery around that once you've been elected, was the situation there. Quite interesting. This is only just over a year ago, and this is a country, of course, Turkey, that is actually in the customs union. And that's how fragile, even near to home, within this customs union of Europe, things are. Thankfully, the military coup didn't go any further. And of course, this has sort of gone off the front page a little bit now, but we're still in the midst of probably what has been the biggest humanitarian crisis that the world has seen in the last 70 years, with the crisis in the Middle East. And, if ISIS really wanted to cause some damage, just think about what the impact might be if the Suez Canal, which is right in the heart of their field of operation, were to close, because they wanted to put some real serious damage into global supply chains. That's something, again, that often gets overlooked. So, and then there's our friend Russia. We're not really sure what he's up to, but we saw what he was doing down in Crimea a year or so ago. Really, again, this guy letting off all sorts of nasty things in Korea, which is increasing the tension on the global platform. And then, of course, we come to our friend Donald. And again, talking about global trade and the sort of big picture of things, he made his position very clear, didn't he? Because in the first week of taking office, he ripped up the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement and said, I don't believe in that. And of course, all of his rhetoric around America first has put the whole NAFTA agreement in some doubt. And he seems now to be getting into a bit of a spat with his opposite number in China. So interesting things going on around the world. Mr. Trump is sort of in a spat with China. We are, in our organisation and with our members, taking what's going on in China very seriously. And I don't know if any of you are following this, the Belt and Road Initiative, where the Chinese government are pledging to invest somewhere between $90 and $100 billion into this initiative over the next 10 years, because they understand that they can reach across this Belt and Road into over a third of global GDP. So I would say ignore what's going on in China at your peril, and we'll come to that again shortly. And against all of that political kind of churn, there's a huge amount of demographic churn going on as well. We've done a lot of work with KPMG Futures Institute and Oxford Economics, people like that. And so we've got some good data now in terms of the trends that are expected over the next 20 or 30 years in terms of not just the growth of population, but the fact that 45% of that population now has a desire to live in and around urban areas, which again is key to our discussions today. So huge pressure on us in the logistics industry. You know, the UK is just a part of this. Population growth to, you know, over 70 million. London, and I don't want this to be London-centric, but London really is an example of this growth of urban creaking infrastructure and so on, as the population of London is expected to top 11 million in the next few years. And not only the population of London, of course, it's like all of the major cities, has this vast visitor throughput, 17.5 million visitors last year, and expected, again, to do with the pound, probably to top 20 million visitors this year. And that's certainly borne out if you read the airline and carrier kind of numbers through the main London airports. And then there's people like me that sort of come in and out of London a few times a week. And this year, the whole commuter number is expected to burst the 1 million commuters a day. So phenomenal change going on here. And this is all relevant to you know, what we're going to be addressing in this e-delivery conference. Now, the other thing, of course, is, as I said at the beginning, this is all about this technology-enabled consumer sitting at the middle of this, thanks to what Mr. Jobs gave us. And what strikes me about this is the pace of change. I mean, this was only 2007 when he, you know, put the first iPhone out there and said this will change everything, and how right he was. And the interesting thing for me, coming back to the China situation, is looking at these pictures on the right-hand side of the screen here. This has opened up a whole new breed of consumer. 750 million new consumers in China that are now technology-enabled, shopping online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 750 million of them. The big difference is, unlike us that know what the inside of Selfridges or Marks and Spencer's look like, these guys have never been into a retail store. They haven't evolved through the bricks and mortar to the multi-channel to the omni-channel. They've just landed straight into a new world of technology-enabled retailing and logistics. Quite phenomenal. And some of you may have seen this before. Again, just to describe the pace of change that's going on here, I thought this was quite interesting, how long it takes to reach 100 million consumers. So it took about 80 years for the telephone to reach 100 million consumers. The television, I think, was about 50 years. And then look what's happened in the last 10 years or so with the advent of the internet and this smartphone, digital world that we're in, mobile technology. The latest being Candy Crush, that took about a year to reach 100 million consumers around the world. Quite phenomenal pace of change. And so, you know, our sort of mantra, I guess, now in the logistics industry, that logistics is really now becoming the new retail. And what we're seeing is, with the sort of decline of the high street, both in terms of retail footprint, jobs in the high street in retailing, that is being replaced by a growth in logistics. This is an industry that's growing. We've got a shortage of, as I mentioned, fulfillment centres, right size, fit for purpose space in the right places. So with the demise of the high street, the logistics industry is growing phenomenally to keep pace with this. And of course, you know, as we're going to talk about during the day, we've got these two big kind of game changers coming in at us from each direction. Amazon sort of coming from the west, and Alibaba coming from the east. So that's my kind of scene setter. Just a couple more slides. Again, just to think about the complexity that we're going to start talking about. We've all been on the conference circuit and seen these things. It was, I guess, fairly straightforward when it was a single linear process, particularly in sort of doing cost to serve modelling and so on and so forth, work out the steps of, you know, the logistics chain from sourcing something in China to getting it through to a retail store or a point of consumption at destination. But it's no longer that linear process. It's now this kind of global ecosystem with the consumer sitting right at the middle of everything, supported with this very complex logistics architecture of multi-pace, multi-channel channels to market, with merchandise moving at different speeds, very often in duplicate or different directions as well. So very, very complex world compared to the world that we were living in only a few years ago. So hopefully that sort of provokes a little bit of thought.